I'm going to welcome all three speakers to join me up here for about a 10-minute Q&A, and I'd like to welcome anybody with questions to grab a microphone. Yes, please. Hold on a second. You're going to get a microphone, I think.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. So you do point out, some of the dilemma in the application of the AI in the drug discovery. And I'm curious about this. AI has not been a new concept, actually, being used in the drug discovery, right? There has been decades of experience by using the computer to aid the protein design and the 3D structure. So what do you think is a major reason behind that prolonged life cycle to bring the drug from discovery to the markets? Is it regulatory or compliances? And how would AI, in the future, would it be possible to accelerate that process and hopefully bring the risks down? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So going back actually to a quote that Rasu had on his slide deck about if you bring digital technology to a broken process, you don't actually improve the process. And from the first slide I show you, this is a very segmented process, right? So a lot of companies will develop really good predictive technologies that impact one piece of that big process, right? But then everything else that comes after it is still moving the same, moving slowly. So I think this is the big challenge. In the process itself, I would argue, probably needs to evolve to better, complement and adopt these technologies. So personally, I think it's more about how the process is conducted. I was just as an example, so I work a lot with computational scientists in pharma who are more on the chemical design side of things. And then I've also talked to scientists who work more in formulation or later stage. And I'm like, okay, well, you guys, are using similar kinds of technologies. Do you talk to each other? Do you share data? Well, no, we don't. They don't even know each other. Right, and so I think this is a general challenge of drug discovery of this industry, right? I think there are technological challenges, but I think there's also huge cultural and process challenges that prevent these technologies, from really having a significant impact across.
But there's hope. And so, Larry, you heard John Rico's remarks at our conference in Rochester. John Rico woke up, the CEO of Mayo, he's a GI guy, and said, I talked to a patient the other day who said they started taking Ozempic and suddenly all of these other diseases they had got better. I wonder, is that a drug target? Is there a physiological relationship? Yeah. I know. Let's go look at 50 million patients and see if there's a signal in that noise, and if so, pursue it. So I actually did that. Yeah. It took 2 hours, and it was like, wow, this is like a p-value of 0.00001. There you go, drug company. Go look at that.
Yes. No, absolutely. No, as I said, I do think that there is hope, and I think, I think companies they want to embrace this change, but I think it's very hard to do so, right? And it's hard, just as another, maybe a little cynical aside. I mean, I think pharmaceutical companies, especially large pharma, are not really poised to build and utilize these technologies in the way that smaller companies are, right? And so we're seeing a lot of externalization of innovation and R&D outside. And when I started my career in pharma, and the CEO of the company said very point blank once, he said, when I say we're going to invest in R&D, our stock goes down. When I say we're acquiring, a drug that's ready to go into patients, our stock goes up. So I think also changing the motivators, and I think talking about building more partnerships with companies rather than these companies trying to take it all on themselves is going to be the way that it will be successful.
Hi, thank you for all your remarks. I'm Justin Mandarides. I'm a faculty member at Bouvet. I'm a biostatistician. And sort of all three of you touched on sort of interesting biostatistics topics, including right now when you're talking about p-values less than 0.0001, the future of healthcare. You spoke about different sampling schemes, bias correction, missing data issues, and you mentioned that oftentimes you're finding that the challenges you're seeing are not necessarily big data challenges, right? In a small sample, small data challenges. So what do you see as we've started some innovative new master's programs here around real-world evidence and biostatistics? What do you see as the role of biostatistics? How do you see it evolving as AI is more involved in healthcare?
So I'll take a stab at this, and there was a bit of a discussion on this in our workshop here on this stage in this room yesterday as well. I do think much like how today you've got physicians and nurses and other clinicians that get trained, and you go through a curriculum, and we get handed a tool, a stethoscope, right? And that's a baseline. You got to know how to use the stethoscope. It's a baseline, and you may then super specialize to be a cardiologist who does echoes all day long. Similar to that model, I do believe that as we're training the future workforce, especially around healthcare, you have to have that baseline of computational knowledge, some fundamental knowledge of artificial intelligence, some fundamental knowledge of biostatistics. That is going to be the norm. And if that is not the norm, then I would venture to say that that would be veering on the side of irresponsibility, right? So it will really be the new stethoscope of the workforce of the future in healthcare.
Right, here is why biostatistics is going to be so essential in 2025 and the next couple of years. Rob Califf, who you quoted, is not probably likely going to write the omnibus regulation for AI. More likely, Rob Califf will point to a series of processes that will end up, I'm guessing, in AI assurance laboratories coming up across the country, including Northeastern. And what will end up happening is a product will come out of Larry's startup. Larry will hand it to you, and you will say, is this product fit for purpose? What are its performance characteristics? What is a data card, model card? And you're going to have to define those parameters.
Yeah. And one other thing I would add is, and I think you, John, spoke about this in your talk, is domain of applicability. And I think this is a statistical, challenge. I think building these models is one thing, using them appropriately is another. And I think, there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all model, nor should there be. And so I think really educating, I think there's a huge educational component that also needs to go hand in hand with this about how do we actually use these and how do we think about, the domain of applicability of these models, when they should be used, when they can't, shouldn't be. And you go back to how they're trained and assigning, some statistical, parameters to that. So I think that is, to me, one of the biggest challenges is really using these tools in the right way.
We're going to take a couple more questions for about 5 more minutes or so, but John and Rasu have to hightail it out of here by 11 on a flight. So a few more brief questions.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Thank you. You've all been terrific. And Larry, thanks for kicking things off. I run a podcast production company that specializes in healthcare podcasts for internal communications. And I'm encouraged, Melissa, by your truth in saying that no one talks to each other. We found during the pandemic, companies like Genentech, one of our clients, people weren't talking to each other because some weren't going to work, and they created a podcast almost as a virtual water cooler. And whether it's Henry Ford Health, and I know for Advocate you do great work, and the Mayo, it's a complex organization. It's so important, as Larry said, have experts in the loop, because otherwise you're talking over everybody's head and you're not maximizing the innovation. By working in this AI bubble, you have to go into it assuming it's complicated for a vast organization. You're going to be hiring thousands of people in North Carolina. This is so over their head, And if you want to get to the promised land, I think that communication and finding new channels to talk to, I'm not surprised that you are working with startups in pharmaceutical and they just don't talk to each other, So keep up the good work. Thank you.
Jens?
Yeah. So Jens Ruder from the Jackson Lab. I have a question, I think, primarily for John. You really nicely articulated the conservatism or the conservative stance of hospitals and sharing data and all the issues that come with the identification. Do you think that there's going to be an industry-wide sort of change in position on this aspect of data sharing that might make, I mean, you already have a nice network and you should be applauded for that effort, but do you think it's going to become sort of more industry-wide acceptance of sharing data in the future?
I do, and here's why. So you've probably, all of you, read the work of John Cotter on change. And what does he say? You need an urgency to change. Well, at the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, were they talking about climate change and global conflict? Not exactly. They were talking about some of the huge demographic challenges that Larry showed us. That is, somewhere between 2060 and 2080, we're going to see the number of deaths on this planet exceed the number of births, but yet we're going to have longevity. There are not going to be enough doctors and nurses to care for those who are living longer. There will only be one answer. The planet needs to come together to create AI that is going to meet the medical need, and that is going to require a level of collaboration that we've never seen before, and there's no other choice. So, hey, it's an existential question for us all.
I think that's a very hopeful response, and I hope that we do get there, but we also know the reality of where things are right now. And even if you look at the last 20, 30 years of the ONC leading, and now ASTP, right? ONC changed their name to ASTP, leading interoperability work across health IT in the United States, it's really at best been a crawl and maybe a walk journey. And now I think we have an opportunity to run, and especially with the power of AI and the capabilities and the urgency that John rightly speaks to. I think we have an opportunity to say, all right, how do we really get to where we have all these silos of information repositories actually speaking to each other and communicating with each other? And how do we then leverage Gen AI to unlock the insights that are traditionally locked away in these silos of information repositories? That person that I was talking about, not just the patient, but the person that I was talking about earlier, doesn't reside in any one of these silos. He, she, it, they reside above the silo, and I think that's really important for us to unlock, and I think that therein lies the promise and that urgency.
And is the future going to be Star Trek or Mad Max? I go with Star Trek.
I would also say this is also a huge challenge in the pharmaceutical industry, and this goes back to the days where there was industrial espionage, right? So, back in the day, and there's still, I think, a big paranoia about this. And when you think about, patents and how these companies make money, it's really challenging. And so there's a lot of consortia, even at the early discovery stage, where they're trying to, promote cross-company communication, data sharing, and I think you need those people. You need the advocates both internally and externally, and also thinking about how technology can de-risk this for companies and make them, see the win-win in it. And I think we're still working toward that.
Two last questions, Hoda, and then over there.
So thank you all, very insightful comments. But none of you talked about training AI. And if we know anything about physicians, John and Rasu, they only use tools that have evidence behind them. So can you talk about all these different tools, ChatGPT, Gemini, what was used to train them? How does a physician know which is a good AI, which is a bad AI, and which one they're going to be able to use in practice?
I think we're really horrible at that. That's probably one of the reasons why we didn't talk about it, to be quite honest. And you're right, we need to be talking more about this because we're actually horrible at that, right? And therein lies the problem, right? All of the elements that we were talking about earlier in terms of hallucinations, or as Larry rightly called it, bullshit that exists out there, the biases that are inherently built into those data models, because the right training sets and the right approaches around training was actually not conducted. And that, I think, needs to be a big priority as we look at the broadening data sets that we're now utilizing to make those evidence-based decisions in healthcare today. I think it is a huge opportunity. We are working on that with a number of specific partners, but I think we're just at the beginning and we're not doing enough of this.
Like even, for example, if I was writing a paper or summarizing something, I might use, ChatGPT. It's been trained on doing that. But if I'm looking for medical knowledge, I might use, Google Gemini or some other. So, but that's not what happens with most people. They kind of just, there's this AI thing and I use it. So
let me offer a vision. On October 19th, just a few days from now, at the HLTH conference, the Coalition for Health AI will release its open source public frameworks for data cards, model cards, predictive AI, and generative AI best practices and lifecycle management. It postulates that there will be a nationwide registry where data cards and model cards are available for free to all. And that may not be an individual physician that's going to go out to the registry and check, but there's no reason why the EHRs can't say, oh, the patient in front of you right now who's a 37-year-old female who comes from this kind of setting with this kind of problem, this algorithm is likely to be best. And that, I hope, in 2025 becomes a reality.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you. My name is Dr. Umbrina Hall, and John, we were actually on a panel together years and years ago. What I heard from you all, so I'm a physician. I've been the bad guy on the insurance government side, and now I'm a patient founder in women's health, building what's called Her Herd. And part of what we're trying to do is there's a lot of unheard women on social media. There are a lot of, pharma does a lot of social listening on social media, but we heard a lot about data quality, and the data that is there is unstructured, of uncertain quality. Could there be malicious actors? There's a whole bunch of different issues there. But it is a gold mine of data of like what is not being heard in the doctor's office, because a lot of EHR is a glorified billing platform for the CFO's balance sheet, not for the patient. So, and this is a self-interested question, because this is what I'm trying to build. How would you, so when we talk about kind of aligning the cooperative, like this EHR and that EHR, how do we think about bringing in the patient voice through these non-traditional data sources? Thank you.
I think it's really critical. I talked earlier about not just a patient, but a person-centered approach to care. And to your point, the EHR today is a glorified billing documentation system of record, a legal system of record that we have in place. I do believe that the voice of the patient is actually not represented well, or represented in some instances at all, in that electronic health record system. There are a lot of patient-led investigators that are out there that are actually doing research on their own. They're pioneering and breaking down silos, and to your point, and to your credit as well, leading the charge in everything from chronic diseases to rare diseases as well. The challenge, I think, right now exists in the business model that led to the propagation of EHRs in the first place. The opportunity, I think, lies in the fact that while we have a lot of data locked away in these electronic health record systems, a lot of the relevant data actually resides with the patients themselves, right? So how do we marry those two? How do we make sure that we're then able to incentivize health systems to work with pharma, to work with big data companies, as an example, to really go after those elements that really create the maximal impact? I think that's the opportunity that we're really gravitating towards.
Yeah, I guess I look at the data as two types, subjective and objective. So subjective would be the patient's account of their treatment, patient report of outcome. So you're probably familiar with the Open Notes movement, started in Boston. Part of the Open Notes movement is the notion that a patient should be writing a note in addition to a clinician writing a note for their experience. And that should be part of the permanent record. So it's slow to start, but it is a trend. On the more objective side, I'm certainly seeing Mayo, but also pharma, starting to look at patient-sourced data from wearable devices and devices in the home as being incorporated into the record. My father died 13 years ago after 23 years with multiple sclerosis. The only way to figure out if a drug worked would be to measure his pain, his subjective sense of well-being or flexibility or steps taken every day, all things not in the electronic health record, and they need to be.
Thank you for raising that. I wish we had more time to riff on that. Well, normally the path of disillusionment takes months or years, but I feel like we squeezed it into this morning throughout the fireside chat and your presentation. So thank you for all that.
EAI has a lot of work to do. That's all I have to say.
All right, please join me in thanking the speakers.